Hello, everyone. This is Carrie O'Shea-Gorgone with Marketing Profs. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to take just a minute and thank Adtaxi for sponsoring today's broadcast. Adtaxi is a client-centric digital organization that brings scale, precision, and sophistication to digital marketing. Leveraging the belief that people matter as much as technology, Adtaxi helps advertisers solve complex marketing challenges with custom, performance-driven solutions. Okay, today's webinar is Programmatic Capabilities Across Platforms, and our presenter is Brian Kroll. Brian is Adtaxi's VP of Sales and Strategic Accounts. He joined the company in 2011 and developed Adtaxi's original quantum optimization algorithm. Brian, take it away.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks everybody for joining today. Looking forward to this time. Here's kind of what we're going to go over today. So we chose this theme as Programmatic as the sweet symphony because in an ideal state, that's exactly what we're doing with the programmatic campaigns. And it's something that's harmonized. We're speaking to the right user across the right platforms, all in harmony, all with the kind of common objective of getting across whatever it is that we're trying to communicate to that prospective customer or client, whatever that may be. But here's kind of what we're going to run through today, sort of an agenda. We'll go through what is programmatic or real-time bidding advertising, a little bit of the evolution of programmatic so we can kind of see where we came from and how we got here. Then we'll go into metaphor for the instruments, which a little bit of a high-level overview of all the different types of programmatic platforms, some of the capabilities, so the composition, what you can do with those platforms to make a pretty sweet music for your customers. And then really the crux of it is how we evaluate the performance, and that comes from the data. And then for the grand finale, we'll kind of walk through a little bit of like how we put all this in action with a brief case study for a recent client. But without further ado, let's jump into what is programmatic or real-time bidding advertising, and then into the evolution of programmatic. So quite simply, from this definition you can see here, programmatic is buying digital advertising space automatically. We're using computers and data to basically decide which ads to buy, how much to pay for them, and often in real time. And essentially, it's the mechanization of media buying. And the way that it works, it's sort of like an omnipresent auction house. You have on the left-hand side here of this schematic, you have sort of the demand side. So these would be the flow of ads and money. So the advertisers working through ad servers, working through demand-side platforms. And then on the right-hand side, you have the supply side. So you have publishers who have different ad units on their sites, and you have sort of a connection in between through ad exchanges. And on the left-hand side, you have people who are bidding for space. On the right-hand side, bidding essentially for specific users, specific individuals, potentially for specific pages. It doesn't really matter, but you basically have all of this happening, and then data is piping in at all levels so that we can get better decision-making on exactly which ads to bid for, which places to bid for, and how much we want to pay for them. And essentially, all of this is happening. It's happening millions of times a second, every single day. And in basically, as your web page loads, you have all of these decisions happening on any random publisher page. All of those ads that are populating are going to be decisioned in probably 50 to 150 milliseconds based on how fast your connection is. But that's essentially sort of like what we're talking about here is like how do we compete in an auction, and how do we be the most effective use of that data to get the best results we want. And what we're ultimately trying to do here is deliver the right ad to the right person at the right time, at the right place, on the right device, and use data to accomplish this simple goal. And essentially, to kind of understand, the evolution of programmatic, we kind of have to go back to the birthplace of digital advertising. And what you kind of see on the top right here, this little ominous sort of ad here says, have you ever clicked your mouse right here? You will. This is arguably the first banner ad that was ever served, and it was served in around 1994. It was on Wired Magazine's website called Hotwire back in the day, and this was an ad for AT&T. And if you clicked on this ad, it took you through to a portal that basically had a bunch of different museum websites. So you could go to their different websites, to the Louvre, etc. This ad had about 40 to 50% of the people who saw that ad clicked on it. So very ominous. And I bring this up because I think that a lot of times when we're talking about how we evaluate the performance of programmatic ads or display ads in general, people are still going back to that 25-year-old mentality of it should all be about clicks. And it's very different today with how today's consumer is. And when you think about sort of the evolution here, you can see in 1996, you kind of had like the birth of ad servers, DoubleClick amongst others. Then you kind of had, essentially like this ecosystem. Ad networks kind of evolved out of this ecosystem, and they really started helping sort of like brands connect with multiple different websites through one ad dashboard. And then 2000, 2003, that's when Google started coming along, right? So like a lot of this happened before people really had indexed the internet. And yes, there were some search engines back then, but nobody had really done it quite the same way that Google does in terms of like the domination of that indexing. And essentially now you can find whatever you want. You don't have to click on a banner ad anymore. Then you saw in 2013, Google kind of got into the display network. Mobile programmatic started taking off in 2014, and then header bidding in 2014-15. And I would say that right now, if we're talking about the evolution of programmatic, we're probably in programmatic 2.0 or 3.0 right now, because we have a whole lot of different platforms that are in the ecosystem as opposed to just display, including connected TV and other things that we'll get into in a little bit. But just want to kind of set the stage here in terms of sort of overall how we got here. And you can kind of see it's grown massively because it works. Programmatic platforms have been growing their inventory and their revenue, and in 2021, projected that roughly 90%, 87% of just about of all ads are going to be traded programmatically. And this includes social. This includes anything that would be, in terms of, not just display ads in this chart, but you're looking at mobile, desktop, tablet ads, video, audio, digital, outdoor, out of home, connected TV. All of this is happening, and it's still growing. I mean, it's growing at about 18% year over year, and it's projected to be 15% year over year growth in 2021, according to eMarketer here. But it's growing because it works. It's incredibly effective, and it's a way that basically you can target exactly who you want with the right message at the right time, as I mentioned on the earlier slide there. And we're going to jump in now to sort of like the metaphor here for the different instruments and talk about basically like the different platforms for which we're typically transacting when we're talking about programmatic advertising. And we use the metaphor here or analogy for a symphony because essentially in a symphony you have multiple different instruments all playing their part, but together you get this beautiful composition and you get an amazing amazing result, right? So everybody's sort of playing different things, different parts, but they're all combined to one goal, and it's all about harmony. And to kind of start out with a little bit of a metaphor here, like display might be boring. It's the same old thing. It's more cowbell if you're going to go with the Saturday Night Live Blue Oyster Cult skit with Christopher Walken. But essentially, you've got all of these different banner ads here on the side, lots of different places. Display is still central. It's been around for a long time. You've got multiple different ad sides, and not mobile's not shown. We couldn't fit everything on one screen here, but essentially you have multiple different ways to reach people. And it's just because publishers have different ways that they're monetizing the inventory. And a lot of people I think discount display, but it still works, and it still works pretty well. The reasons why we really like display is it's incredibly affordable for brand building. We see incredibly high conversion rates if you're not looking at just click-through. Looking at tracking the post-view actions in display banners is key to success. It's also something that has incredible scale. I don't know if anybody's seen some of the commercials out there from the Trade Desk, but they have the walled garden analogy with the kids having trick-or-treating. And I think it's a great example where it's open internet. You can basically reach just about anybody, whether somebody's on whatever platform. It doesn't really matter. It's essentially like getting the right ad in front of them at the right time. And remarketing is incredibly powerful too. Every time if I'm doing a presentation and ask people, do they still believe in display? Do they think display works? Everybody says no, they don't really notice banner ads, and then I ask people to raise their hands for if they've been retargeted with a pair of shoes or something like that, and they say yes. So definitely people are noticing that, and we see that it's an incredible way to drive revenue and drive results for our clients. But it's still a very powerful tool. It's the original, but it's still kicking around and still working really well. Then we get into native ads, and native ads are kind of like the chameleon of digital advertising. It's a way to sort of immerse your ad within popular websites, and you're sort of dynamically matching the look and the feel of that site. And native, I would say, is probably a little bit different than display in that it's kind of a hybrid between what you would get in a social post, where you have an image, some text, and a call to action, but it's the promise of content that you're really giving to a reader. It's an extension of where you want to land somebody. It's like you see something and you click on it and you expect to go there and land there and see what you clicked on. But here's sort of an example here, right? So it fits the form and function of the environment in which it's on. It's generally generated dynamically, and it's a pretty seamless user experience. You get your image, the heading copy, your logo, tailored for hundreds of different platforms and formats, and there's multiple different native platforms out there. But generally, they all say sponsored content, but it fits in with everything else in the different stories that you would see. So it's a really effective way, and I would say that unlike display advertising, where most of the conversions you see if you're talking about direct response don't come from clicks, and it comes from more of like a view through. Native probably has more of a last click type response, where there is that promise of content, so they click on it and then they get what they want, and it's a great way if you're into last click measurement, which I don't necessarily agree with, that it's something that's really effective. Native can be a great tool for you. Another reason why we like native is it gets higher engagement than traditional banners. This is, I think, from like an IAB survey, but from back in the day. But they surveyed 5,000 different consumers and found that in-feed native advertising was more appealing and less intrusive than any other paid media format. Sort of in the upper right quadrant here. Pop-up ads in the lower left-hand corner. Nobody really likes the pop-up ads, unfortunately, as consumers. But native works and it blends in, and like I said, they like it because it's engaging and it's appealing and it's interesting, and it's also not really as intrusive or annoying as potentially some other types of ads in terms of consumers. Then we get into video advertising. So pre-roll or mid-roll video is basically you're combining sight, sound, and motion to elicit an emotional response. And this is in terms of what we're looking at YouTube, but also it happens all the time on different websites. You could be on any different publisher, and they'll generally have pre-roll happening before you get to the video clip that they're promoting. And these, it's a great way to sort of combine in like a either a skippable or non-skippable format, like a 15-second or 30-second video, which basically is getting across your point of like why somebody should take notice of your business and do business with you. You can showcase variable length videos. Short videos, we think, are really great for sort of maintaining brand recognition. There's multiple different options. Don't really like the auto start ones personally. I prefer to have skippable formats for advertisers, because if it's sort of you're making it something, you're putting the control into the consumer hands of the consumer there. But there's also non-skippable formats too, and you have really great ways with pre-roll to sequence ads to tell a story. So you could essentially say, from a targeting perspective, show video number 1, and once somebody has watched 100% of video number 1, stop showing video number 1 to that user, and then serve video number 2. And then once somebody's watched 100% of video number 2, stop showing video number 2 and show video number 3. So it could be a great way to sort of like tell a story over a sequence of 15-second spots. And arguably, if somebody makes it through the end of video 3 or video 4, I'd say they're a pretty good fit for whatever it is that you're marketing to them. It's also great because brand safe placements. There's a lot of different quality controls you can have, so that you can basically put pre-roll where you want to put it in front of the people that at the exact right time, device, etc. The reasons why we like it is there is a massive amount of reach there as well too. You can essentially, there's hundreds of millions of video impressions available every single day outside of YouTube. YouTube is sort of the 800-pound gorilla of video, with more people watching it. I think it's second search engine to Google, second largest search engine to Google. But outside of that, there's a ton of scale and a ton of reach. It's also great for engagement, and it really resonates. The right video ads can do wonders for connecting somebody with your brand. You can choose pre or mid-roll posts. So there's depending on what somebody's watching, it basically acts as kind of a TV commercial in sense, inside of whatever somebody's watching. Although we don't advise necessarily going with exactly what you do on TV. And then remarketing is a great way too, right? If you know somebody's been on your site, and if they are taking interest or showing interest in certain sections, put a video back out that's different, that tells somebody why they should do business with you, or why that would be a compelling reason to investigate or connect with you. Audio is something that's grown massively in terms of programmatic capabilities. and it's really streaming anywhere. And you kind of see a lot of different sort of logos up here. But audio is a massive way to get in front of people, whether they're streaming radio or podcasts. Same sort of concept that you would have with pre-roll video, but it's just an audio format. And you can kind of see how the growth of what's happening here over the last 5-6 years in terms of people who are listening to online audio in the last week. About 60% of the population of U.S. adults over the age of 12 have been listening to audio within the last week. And then if you look at hours listened to in the last week on the population here on the right, there's quite a bit of time, right? So about 16 hours a week, people are listening to streaming audio. And the way that ads work on streaming audio with programmatic, it's basically stitched right into the stream dynamically, bidding on those positions just like we would bid on display ads, etc. And it's a great way to sort of reach people whether they're on the go. One thing we like about it from a connectivity standpoint is, people have their phones. If you're streaming a service, you could be streaming it through your car speakers, through your home, whatever it may be. Typically, these are non-skippable ads from an audio perspective because they're stitched into the stream there. But people can be actively listening, and you can sort of subliminally put passive action in the back of their minds. It's something where, depending on how somebody is viewing the content or consuming the content, there might be a potential to put companion banner ads alongside too. So you get a way to sort of get your message across in terms of audio, what you want to say, but then you might have a complementary companion banner ad that sort of reinforces that point and could potentially offer like a direct click, direct response type offer. Programmatic audio, I would say, is still in its infancy. It's growing. There's a lot of inventory and new players coming out, but definitely a great way to get your message out in front of people, just with a different sort of tone, right? So it's not necessarily all about like sight, sound, and motion, but it's definitely sound, and you can definitely impart something that you want to get across to folks. Probably the newest and most exciting part of the programmatic portfolio would be connected TV. And with connected TV, what you really are getting is the impact of TV with the precision of digital buying. So same thing with sight, sound, motion, eliciting emotion. But instead of doing this on web pages, this is now happening in the living room. And essentially, it's all about the audience. We've got a lot of different content owners and networks sort of out here. You see commercials all the time on sporting goods, or at least I see them all the time for people, DirecTV Now and Sling, trying to get people to come on and ditch their cable, cut the cord, and move over to a streaming service. But it's essentially the same. It's exactly the same TV, right? You're still watching ESPN. You're still watching live sports. You just have the ability to now dynamically bid to put a TV ad in front of these folks, whether it's on the TV or whether it's on whether they're watching on tablet or whether they're watching on their phone, multiple different ways. And essentially, CTV is also in its infancy, and it's growing like crazy. But what's really interesting is that while the growth is there and the consumer adoption is there, marketers really haven't caught on. If you kind of look at the growth of CTV in 2019, it grew about 37.6%, and the ad spend was about almost $7 billion. Linear TV declined about 5%, but the ad spend is about $44 billion. So there's sort of a disproportionate here scale in terms of where marketers have shifted, and consumers are kind of moving a little bit faster than marketers here. But there's a ton of inventory out there, and you can get a lot of the same data that you would from your banner ad campaigns, your pre-roll campaigns, or your native campaigns, or your audio campaigns. It's just happening now in a professionally produced environment on TV. And again, why we like it, it's that impact of the TV. You're putting an ad on the biggest screen in the house, but you're doing it household by household, right? So essentially, if we're talking about like OTT or over the top, which is a definition for OTT, basically it's somebody who's streaming the service through their household internet connection. And so as the ad breaks are coming in, instead of having ads that are happening like you would if you're watching linear TV, people are bidding on that, right? And the best part about this is it's like, the authenticity. Seeing an ad on TV, I think, has always sort of been like the great equalizer. If it's on TV, it must be true, right? But you get that same production quality. It's all coming through generally in HD, so you have to get some really good quality videos. in there, and nice high bit rates, sample size, etc. But you're essentially putting ads in front of people while they're watching TV. It's just streamed. And this happens through live events. I've seen some ads while watching, NBA finals, etc. All these things where it's, it's exactly like what you would expect from a regular TV experience. It's just through streaming. And because it's in its infancy so far, and because they're still growing inventory, there's a ton of scale out there, and it's I wouldn't say necessarily affordable, but when you're talking about putting like a CPM of maybe like $25 to $50 range, you're able to basically put these ads in front of exactly who you want. So you don't have the waste you might have with linear. It's not really like the tool of broad reach from like broadcast, but it's really now very specific, so that I can show one person, one household an ad, and their neighbors a completely different ad, based on exactly what it is that their attributes show that they'd be interested in from a data perspective. I want to actually, speaking of CTV, do a little shameless plug here. My colleague Bob Batchelor is going to be conducting a webinar March 2nd that you can sign up for at adtaxi.com/events. On why CTV is fundamental to your marketing strategy. And that's going to be March 2nd at 3 p.m. Eastern Time or 12 p.m. Pacific Time. You can go to adtaxi.com/events to sign up, and we'll have a link at the end as well. Okay, so now to the fun part. We've kind of talked a little bit about sort of all of the different platforms, kind of using this sort of musical scale here, or sorry, I'm not exactly there. I can't read music, but this is sort of an example, I guess, of where would sort of each of these platforms fit in terms of harmony across the traditional purchase funnel. So if you look at sort of like on the left-hand side, pretty much all of these are great for generating awareness, right? So display, native, pre-roll, audio, connected TV, all awesome at generating awareness. All of them are really good at trying to sort of elicit intent and consideration. Purchase is probably a little bit easier on display and native. Pre-roll is typically a little bit higher funnel. Same thing with audio. Remarketing on pre-roll, remarketing on audio, remarketing on connected TV, all of these things definitely can help with purchase intent. But typically, if you're looking at like where things would fit into a overall cycle for consumer, it's in an ideal state, you have something where you're talking to the same person in awareness across all the different platforms. So whether somebody's on display, they're seeing the same display message that they would see on native, that they would see on pre-roll, that they would see on audio, connected TV, etc. And then as you move down the funnel, you're messaging people with exactly the same sort of consistent messaging and harmony all the way down across all the different platforms, until they're either ready to interact with your business or not. All right, now to my favorite part, the capabilities. So when we think about what we can do with this, yes, there's all the different platforms, but there's a great way for us to really dive into the targeting here. And so when you think about how music is conducted, you've got your tempo, different instrument intros, solos. You control the volume, the crescendo. The conductor's doing all of this. Same thing would be happening on the programmatic side in terms of a platform, but you're basically deciding like what to do with each different part. And so when we're talking about targeting, this sort of applies on pretty much like all of the different platforms that I've just talked about, from display through connected TV. You can do first-party targeting. So first-party targeting, an example of that would be, its best target would be website target, remarketing, right? So somebody's been on your website, it's your first-party data, you can remarket to those people depending on where they've been, choose different types of messages that you'd want to show them. There's also ways to do sort of the bring your own data, where you could upload, let's say, a customer list, just like you could do in social, and match those offline data points, data markers to online data markers, and then target people that way. So first-party data, first-party targeting is probably one of the more effective methods, but obviously that requires getting people to your site, right? So like once people are there, you've got the data. To get people there, third-party targeting happens. So third-party targeting would be targeting that you're buying through like a demand side or a DMP or whatever that might be, where you're picking different data from data providers based on anybody's browsing history or any sort of attributes that have been gathered from them. You can retarget to people on other devices. So let's say that somebody has been on your site on a on their laptop, or you can remarket to them on your mobile. So cross-device targeting is huge. You can also do the same thing with Connect TV. And then lookalike modeling is a way that you basically can take all of your first-party data and then scrub that up against third-party data and say, out of all of the everything we know about our first-party data, let's go out and find people who have similar digital footprints or fingerprints, and then go out and find those folks. They may not look like in terms of like physical similarity, but it's really like a solid data similarity. It's like these are people who will be very important or very likely for us to be interacting with our business because they're very similar to our existing customers. And some of the things you can do on audience development with third-party data targeting, you can target by demographic information, so age or gender or education, something about the household dynamic, like do they have parents in the home, kids in the home, etc. Income. Some of these you have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. Generally, to get demographic targeting, a data provider will have to have self-declared this data. That may be from multiple different ways that someone may do that, whether it's through like a third-party service or whatever. But kind of take a little bit of grain of salt. Generally, people won't lie about their gender. Age is a little iffy sometimes, but a lot of this is generally pulled from multiple different data sources, and it's all available to target with any of the different platforms I was just talking about. Shopping and browsing habits, right? So same thing from a third-party standpoint. Are people typically online shoppers? What are they interested in? Are they browsing a lot of home decorating websites? Are they actively in market for a vehicle? Maybe they're going to any of the different sort of vehicle aggregators out there. Are they really into tech? Are they spending a lot of time looking around at different websites searching for solutions to coding or whatever that may be, problems they're stuck on, right? So it's like depending on where someone is, you can target that way. Interest targeting, so whether people are into music, different genres of music, travel. Let's say you wanted to reach people who are in market to go to Hawaii. You could serve ads if you're a hotel there. Say like, hey, these people all show intent to travel from wherever to Hawaii. Let's make sure that we're putting bidding ads from them so they should book our hotel. Sports interest targeting, cooking, business, different types of interest, different types of what type of business they work at. So like occupation type things as well, and then also like life events too. I think I should say life events. Geography is huge too, right? So where do people live? Where do they work? How far do they typically travel from home to work, etc. And then like if you're thinking about geography standpoint, you can do sort of radius targeting. So you could say like I want to target a 1 mile radius around this exact address or point if that's your store or multiple different stores. You can target by congressional districts if you're in on the political side of things. You can target by zip code level, DMA level, country level, etc. So all of these things go into deciding how you're going to develop the audience. And sort of one of the what I've always tried to coach people when I am working with advertisers. Ultimately, you kind of have to to put an effective plan together. It's simple. You have to answer at a top level, at least, 3 sort of key questions, which is like, who do you want to reach? What do you want to tell those people? And what do you want those people to do? And it doesn't have to just be one campaign, right? The beautiful part about programmatic and the way that this is all mechanized is you're able to say people may have multiple different personas that they want to reach, and they may have multiple different actions that they want to elicit, and they may have multiple different messages that they want to tell those different personas. So it's really all about putting all of that together, mapping it all out, and building a campaign around that, and then turning it over to the bidding to essentially decide, how much we're going to pay for different folks based on what we're seeing from how they're responding to these ads. That gets into the optimization piece. And this may be a little bit hard to see here, but essentially using bid modification is a really key part about how we're buying with programmatic. If you're familiar with search buying, similar to sort of how you do an enhanced bid with on Google or something along those lines, basically you're just saying like I'm willing to bid an X% more or less than my base bid based on some sort of action. And when we're thinking about day parts, what I kind of have here at the top, that the top sort of grid or matrix is a sample. Let's say it's a sample of like 90 days for e-commerce conversion rates, or sorry, for when revenue comes in for sales for a particular company, right? And so the darker the blue, the higher the number of where their revenue or sales comes in by day part. So in this case, Monday at 6 p.m. might be the highest, followed by maybe Monday at 9 a.m. But they also get a ton at Sunday at 6 a.m. and in different parts of the day. And the red would be they don't necessarily get a lot of traction. So let's say that if you know your top hour over, if the data shows that most of your transactions are happening within a certain time, it would make sense to base your bids from, say, a remarketing standpoint on how you're dynamically retargeting to make sure you're in front of people when they're thinking about buying or purchasing your product. So let the data inform how you buy. And so that sort of like, call out down below with the different heat map, the areas in green would correspond to the times of where you get the best shopping activity, and the areas in red would be where you get the least amount. So you don't have to pay the same every single time. You would say maybe put a base bid of $2 and then you modify that so that if you were modifying it plus 50%, your base bid is now willing to bid $3 CPM for people that fit that certain time frame. But if you know that it's you still want to be active and targeting people because you get sales at all hours of the day, but it's not necessarily huge on, say, maybe Friday at 8 p.m., then you would want to have a bid modification pulling your bids down. So you're still there, but you're saying instead of paying $2, I'm willing to pay $1.75, or I'm willing to pay $1.50, or maybe it's $1.50, whatever that may be. But essentially, this is something that can be generated and mapped out so that you're basically like making sure, getting back to the whole putting your ad right person, right time, right place, at the right time to the right people, based on where they've been on your site with the right message to get them to convert. And you're doing it in an efficient manner that's mechanized. And then you sort of adjust this over time so that you get a highly optimized day part bid modifying for your campaigns. And this happens across everything, right? So whether this is connected TV or native or audio or video or just regular old display, cowbell, this is something where it's a smart bidding. This is like sort of like the heart and soul of programmatic would be sort of like how we're modifying bids. Also modifying bids based on devices, right? So let's say that from looking at your analytics that you have people convert on your site at a much higher rate who are on a laptop or a desktop, in this case it says PC, than on a tablet. In this case, you would say, all right, so if people are out there and we're finding people who are highly likely to purchase our products because we've got a really dialed in campaign, and they're showing up and there's a chance to bid for a PC versus a tablet, we want to bid higher on the PC. And all of these things compound, right? So if I was like somebody showed up and I'm putting, let's say, 120% bid here or 20% extra bid for a PC, and I already have a 50% extra bid for the right day part, if somebody shows up at 5 p.m. on a PC, you would want to bid exceptionally high for that person because there's a high likelihood that that person's going to convert. So bidding up is a great way, or looking at the different devices and how we're making these bid optimizations. This fluctuates over time too. You may have a really mobile friendly business, in which case maybe you would want to not run a whole lot on PC, etc. Or maybe you're looking at advertising for app downloads or something like that, where that would be 100% on mobile. So lots of different things that you can do in terms of device bid modification. Another one of my favorites is looking at recency bidding. And these are sample numbers, but essentially with recency bidding, what you're doing is you're adjusting a bid modifier based on how long it's been since somebody has been to your site, right? So let's say that let's say you're an e-commerce business and somebody puts something in your cart. You would want to bid really heavily for the first however many hours, maybe minutes, etc., because you know that maybe if somebody's weighing between buying from you or buying from a competitor, you want to make sure you get in front of those people. But over time, if somebody hasn't purchased, typically that propensity to convert goes down. And so you see those sort of the green bars here, that would be the propensity to convert. And over time, if they're not going to have as high a propensity to convert, you shouldn't bid the same. So maybe you're going to bid $5, $6, $10 CPMs to start because you really want to make sure that you win that auction, and you really want to make sure that you get that ad in front of somebody when it's time to convert. But over time, maybe you drop that down to $1 or $2. So you're still getting out in front of people. It's just changing, and it's a much more effective buy than just sort of a static bid, which you would see here for that green line, right? So if you're analyzing your data and you know people don't really convert for a certain amount of time, you could also stop bidding. If you know that somebody's like, hey, if they haven't bought within 3 to 4 days, then why bother going after it if our data shows that it doesn't make any sense? So you basically just set up a rule and say stop bidding after a certain amount of time. Frequency bids are also really important too. So our data has shown that typically people convert on the lower the number of impressions. So generally if somebody has converted after the first, second, or third impression, the likelihood to convert drops down significantly as well too. Maybe they're just not interested, or maybe it's just not the right time right then. So if we know that the first retargeting ad is more valuable than the fifth, why would we want to pay the same amount? So we want to make sure that for that very first ad impression for somebody, that we want to bid high enough to make sure that we win it and win that initial, that initial impression. And then over time, if somebody still hasn't purchased or whatever, then you start decreasing your bid so that you're at the 7th or 8th or 9th time. You're able to say you're paying pennies on the dollar as opposed to that same amount. And you sort of see same example here, right? So that static bid is going to be paying the same thing, but it's clearly not worth the same. So wrapping a bid modifier around something for frequency, for recency, for device, for daypart, all of these things are just some sample ways of how you would start optimizing campaigns. Moment targeting is also really cool, and this is something that's sort of happened a little bit more recently. But there's multiple different data providers out there where you can target based on the weather. So if you know that the temperature is a certain like high or low, like only serve ads when the temperature is over 80 degrees if you're selling iced tea. I'm making that up. Maybe people like iced tea when it's cold. All depends on the user. But you get sort of where I'm going with this is that if you know that your business thrives when it's really hot outside, or if you know that your business does not thrive when it's really cold outside, you can decide, turn ads on or off if all of a sudden it's really cold outside, or if it's snowing, or if it's raining, or if it's cloud cover. This is all based on weather data for that user's zip code, right? So if we know that I'm in my home zip code and all of a sudden it starts raining and it's going to be raining for a while, maybe you would have ads showing up for whatever that'd be, game downloads or something. Somebody's bored and they're going to want to do something, can't really go outside and play, right? There could be other things in terms of like health conditions. Whether it's air quality, or if the flu is really high in somebody's area, or pollen if you're working on a campaign for, say, a decongestant or antihistamine or something like that. You can target based on actual pollen levels that particular day, whether it's high pollen or low pollen, etc. Different live events, live games, stock fluctuations, all kinds of other things are available from like a dynamic targeting standpoint that's all pulled in from third-party data providers. You have to pay a cut, a CPM to these providers, but ultimately when you're talking about putting exactly the right ad in front of the right person on the right device at the right moment, this is a really powerful tool. Speaking of powerful tools, dynamic remarketing is something that we've seen be incredibly effective, right? And you can target people based on, change up the ads based on where people have been. And sort of my example earlier about, the shoes following around or whatever, you can choose essentially like how you would want to, not only the message you would want to serve, but also your bid optimization, how much you would want to bid from a bid modifier, sort of based on where somebody is. So if somebody's just a general, like been to your homepage, and you want somebody to come back to your website, maybe you don't have a bid modifier for that, right? It's just like 100%, like nothing's going to change there. But if somebody has been looking at a product page and they haven't put anything in their cart yet, then that's where you'd say, all right, I want to bid a little bit heavier for that person. And I would say 125% of normal bid. And then you'd want to show them the products that they were last looking at, right? And maybe some complementary or compatible products. If that person is then at the checkout page, and you want them to convert, maybe you're bidding, a lot higher. We're 150, 200%. If somebody's, started the checkout process, but hasn't finished, make sure you're getting back in front of them and you have a high bid for that. But then you also have your recency and frequency bids. But basically, you're willing to, make sure you're winning that impression when that person is at the moment of decision. And then another part with dynamic creative that's awesome is based on what maybe people have purchased, you can look at serving ads that might be complementary purchases, right? So if you have something where it's like a cross sell or upsell, if you're an e-com site, hey, you bought these shoes, wouldn't you really like this bag or whatever to go with it? Multiple different options there. It depends on how you set up your data and your structure, but think of this as sort of always on campaigns that you don't really have to adjust, and it's going to show something that's very personalized and unique to that user. And it's incredibly powerful when you're matching that. What do you want? Who do you want to reach? What do you want to tell them? What do you want them to do? If you're putting that based on your methodology for how you've designed your campaign, very scientific. I want to show this ad to this person exactly at this time once they've taken these actions, and I'm willing to pay this amount for it because I know that it converts. So how do we get into evaluating the data, right? So you've set all this stuff up. You've got a really scientific, well thought out, detailed campaign that's mechanized and it's running. You're doing all of this buying. How do you optimize this, right? So how do we look at making changes beyond what we've initially set up? And that comes from the data. And so really evaluating the data. Right now, it relies a lot on the pixel. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that that's probably going to be changing with the next couple of years with some announcement that Chrome has made elsewhere. I think that the programmatic universe is really moving more to a potentially like a universal ID solution. More to come on that. Nothing's really been decided. It's a little bit of the wild, wild west still. But for now, at least, pixels are sort of the way that most programmatic platforms are tracking performance. And essentially what's happening is every time these ads are served, you have an impression tracking or click tracking pixel, et cetera, in the ad, and it's in somebody's browser. And so whether they are taking advantage of that ad right then and there, you serve them an ad, they're going to click or they're not. But you're listening afterwards for a conversion event. And so the pixel with the ad has all the information about when the ad was served, right? So it's got the ad size, the timestamp, where it was served, etc. And then on your website, you have different pixels set up to listen for those conversion events. And as people are moving through and looking at those different conversion events, you're able to track essentially like what's happening and how did this ad perform. Data can come back if it's like an e-com perspective. Revenue can be passed back through, so you know that somebody purchased something. It was this dollar amount. Here's the order ID. Any other information you want to pass back. So if you had, say, like this, they purchased like the following things, whatever, never pass back anything personally identifiable. Huge no-no, not something that any ad platform will generally allow. But you can essentially like have this and it's all anonymized, but you say like, right here, this ad served this. And in general, I have this campaign, it generated this amount of revenue. Here's what I spent. I can now calculate or compute an effective cost per acquisition or return on my ad spend. And based on this data, it allows traders to go in and adjust bids on real-time performance information, essentially to help optimize the campaign. So whether you're trying to decrease your CPA or increase your return on ad spend, or maybe you're bidding for increasing a profit margin if you have that kind of data built in, all of this is done on the back end so that information is coming back in after the ads have been served. And in addition to online conversion tracking, there's also offline conversion tracking as well. Essentially, with offline conversion tracking for real-time bidding, or at least most programmatic, I'll say like social is a little bit different, but you can track offline events by essentially working with geolocation measurement partners. And essentially imagine putting a geofence around a specific area, and let's say you wanted to track you have like a clothing boutique or something like that, and you're serving ads to people, and you want to track when those people show up inside your geofence. So you put a geofence exactly around your specific location, down to a couple meters, complete polygon, so it's around the walls, etc. And then you serve ads to people, and then when those people come through, based on the information from these geolocation measurement partners, it counts as a conversion. And typically you can extrapolate that data. You could say like, I know that everybody who walks into my store, I have a close rate of X, my average sale is Y. You can try and approximate the return on ad spend for all these different placements. Obviously, from a consumer privacy standpoint, CCPA, other things people may not want you to do that for them. So there's a little bit of a you have to take that into consideration based on like what you're targeting. But in terms of it is something that can be done, and it's something that's actually pretty prominently done out there. Lots of other different measurement grains, right? So when you're thinking about sort of the end all be all, what did I do? What was the result of my performance? You can now dig into all the different grains and say, which of these things impacted performance, right? So like, I know I got a ROAS of let's say like a 3x return on my investment, but did certain ad formats perform better than others? Did different creatives perform better than others? Did different browser types perform better than others? Did different device types or geo or temperature buckets or time, like viewability, fold adjustments, etc. All of this stuff populates in, and you can pull it in from reports from just about any ad server and get information on how your ads are performing. And this is where you can really fine tune measurement. Of course, this is something that if you're going to do this manually, can be pretty time intensive. And the whole concept of programmatic is you want to try and mechanize and automate that. And that's something that we've done with our quantum algorithm, where essentially like what we're doing is we have programs set up that are essentially like listening for all of this information and then analyzing data and maximizing the budget across all different ad groups so that you can get the best bang for your buck based on all of these different factors. And so sort of the way that you mechanize this is you pull all of the data in from the backside of the ad platform into a data warehouse. The algorithm analyzes everything, and then it recommends sort of budget allocations based on someone's objective. So if we say that, hey, I really want to grow ROAS, here are the different budget recommendations of where I would shift budget, where I would make additional optimizations to achieve that objective. And then essentially we're optimizing to bring the highest value visitors to the site for the lowest cost possible. And it's something that's always happening. And a lot of different ad platforms have kind of like their own individual like optimization as well. And what we tested over 9,000 different campaigns just to see what happens when you apply this level of optimization as opposed to just running platform sort of standard auto optimization. And we see across the board there's improvement. And with our quantum program, shameless plug, had a 93% retention rate for people who've been running that program over last 5-6 years since we've been running. But it works across all verticals, and it's not so much. It's really about getting in front of that person with the right message, right time, and that's essentially what we're doing, is trying to get the highest value visitors to a site at the lowest possible cost. Couple minutes left. I'm just going to real fast run into a quick case study of sort of how all of this works and how sort of you think about this from an optimization standpoint, and then we'll get into some QA here in a minute. But this case study we had for an electronics and home furnishings retailer, and of course their goal, like every other retailer, is more sales, more online sales in particular, and getting more sales at a lower cost per sale. And so, I've been talking, not really about prospecting or remarketing, but thinking about sort of where people are in the funnel. We devised for this particular advertiser about 25% of their budget really went into prospecting. They had massive amounts of SKUs on their site. So basically, like we want to try and get people into the site, but they also were pretty well known. So we also have people convert. But we had very specific audiences. So holiday specific audiences, custom audiences based on frequent historical shoppers, competing retailers, etc. Mobile location device providers are not necessarily only used for conversion. It can also be used for targeting purposes too. So we were targeting people who had propensity to visit competitors. All of the prospecting creatives sort of featured like a rotating selection of the featured on sale products that were updated weekly. So sort of like the top sellers, like these are the things that everybody else is buying. Let's make sure that if these are the things that are flying off the shelves, we're targeting lookalikes of these people with the audience, the things that they're most likely to buy. And then on the remarketing side, it was a really, really detailed funneled approach tuned to really extend that audience reach and maximize the order totals per sale. And some of the ways that we were doing that are what I talked about here. So we're increasing bids and really looking at the frequency caps with each step down the retargeting funnel. So whether somebody was on a product page or somebody was on a cart page, cart abandonment, checkout page, etc., and then the final sale, set all of that up, and then the recency bids were set up to most aggressively in the first 12 hours, and then we tapered off. And the segmentation of geography started looking into, okay, where are high propensity geographies, where are medium high, medium low, and low, and then put bid modifications on geo as part of this as well too, so that we know that if we have a high propensity to sell into certain areas, make sure that we're winning those bids as opposed to areas where maybe somebody, for whatever reason, for shipping or who knows what it is, some things that we can't see, people just aren't buying in these areas as much as others. So maybe we'll still bid there, but not bid as much. A lot of the same time of day day of week bid adjustments I talked about earlier, where you really wanted to mimic organic site visitation patterns. So that same sort of quadrant I showed you, essentially what we looked at was, organically, when are people shopping? How are they coming in? What are they looking at by product? And then seeing if this is when people are coming in to look for these types of electronics or home furnishings organically, we would want to make sure that, if it's just, if that's the pattern, let's make sure that we are highly optimized and making sure that we're putting our ads in front of people on the prospecting side when people are making those decisions, or when they're doing that research. Then, of course, obviously, like white and blacklist, we found that certain domains did exceptionally well. Make sure that we're whitelisting those and giving additional bids for those. Blacklisting any domains where maybe we served a lot of impressions and nothing's really ever happening, right? So it's like all of this is mechanized and automated, and the results were tremendous. Obviously, I'm not going to show a bad case study. I'm going to show a case study, but this retailer showed a 74% increase in revenue over the prior year and prior agency, a 92% increase in return on ad spend, and a 49% decrease in their CPA. So, really taking the time to dig into the data, use the programmatic platforms to their full capabilities, and make sure that you're just really focused on ruthlessly focused on the end result, and moving budget where it's going to get you the best possible outcome. It works. And I should add, this was all done with just display ads too. This was not across the funnel with everything else. This case study is 100% just on the same old boring cowbell. Anyway, I sort of, in closing here, hopefully tried to demonstrate that, the way that we think about this is it's a symphony, right? You have multiple different things all working in concert to generate marketing success. So all the different platforms, all tiered with the right capabilities, so that you're serving that right ad to the right person at the right time to get marketing success. And so with that, I will say thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to do some QA here in just a second, but another shameless plug: to learn more about Adtaxi, you can check us out at adtaxi.com. Also, more events at adtaxi.com/events, and then resources. And I will kick it back over to Carrie.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. And everyone, if you were interested in that event, that's going to feature Bob, who I can vouch for as very nice and a very good speaker, will be taking place on April 2nd at 3 p.m. Eastern. And details on that will be available at the Adtaxi events link tomorrow. So thank you again for all that great information, Brian. If you have a burning question right now for our presenter, now's your chance to type it into the Q&A box on the left. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on the questions that have come in so far. Can you, Brian, target people who have seen a certain number of sequence ads?
Yes, you can. So it depends on the platform, but most of the, like in terms of like video or audio, you can target people based on how they have, like the percent completion rate. So let's say that anybody who's watched over 75% of a certain ad, you're basically building audiences as the campaign deploys, right? So once somebody has watched 100% of ad number one, those people get bucketed into a segment of ad number one viewers, and then you suppress those people from ad number one now. So once you've seen number one, stop showing them ad number one, target ad number one viewers with ad number two. And so you could do it so that you say like suppress after one or two or three times or whatever. But essentially you build out that funnel, and if you have the right content and it's chained all in that way to sort of really tell a story, then absolutely you can. And you can also do that with display, with audio, with connected TV. All of these things are great, and I think it works really well from like a remarketing standpoint. If you knew somebody was investigating, working with you, or from a B2B standpoint in particular, or whatever, if somebody was looking at specific services, maybe you remarket to them with CTV of a certain ad, and then after they've watched it, show them another ad, and so on and so forth, all the way down the chain.
You touched on this super briefly during your presentation, but we had another question. How will data privacy laws affect the audience development you mentioned?
I think that's still a little bit to be determined. Ultimately, privacy is king, and as a consumer myself, I value my privacy heavily. I also heavily value relevant content. If somebody's going to be marketing ads to me, I don't need to see ads for things that I'm not interested in. I prefer to see ads for things that I am absolutely interested in. So, I think data privacy in terms of how people are messaging CCPA in particular, you want to make sure that you give people a chance to opt out. I think you see this now on the vast majority of websites you go to. It's sort of like accept or deny cookies. If you don't want to target opt into cookies, then probably aren't going to go to the site. So I think every business kind of has to go through that on their own, especially if you're subject to CCPA. GDPR, I think we've seen a lot of the stuff that I kind of talked about is not available in GDPR. So you have different sort of most of what I was talking about was U.S. based, U.S. and Canada, but so some of it's not available for GDPR. But I think it's going to be evolving, and
as
I
long
think
as it's
that
permission based, right?
exactly, yeah.
Okay. Is your bidding solution CPA based only, or is it impression based as well?
Typically, you can do multiple different bids, right? So most of the time we are looking at when you're buying ads, sometimes you can buy on a CPA basis. Typically, I prefer bidding on like a CPM basis. If you have to, you can bid on a CPC basis in terms of when you're trying to buy inventory. Kind of depends on the strategy. Sometimes you're able to generate a high amount of really on-target impressions at a low volume by doing a CPC bid strategy, even if the goal is just impressions and reach. So you sort of like trick the platform into giving you more impressions by bidding for CPC. Most of them are CPM based bids, and then we're using Quantum to optimize to an effective CPA, though.
Can you adjust video so that the viewer doesn't have to see 100% before seeing the next in the series?
Yes. So you could bid for a 25% completion rate or a 50% completion rate, whatever it may be. Video, typically, if you're looking at like a 15-second video, or a 15-second pre-roll, typically works best. That's sort of what we recommend. 30 seconds would be probably better from like a remarketing standpoint. Somebody's already got interest and they're interested, so you have a little bit more chance to tell a story there. But yeah, absolutely, you can say like anybody who's watched over 50% of the video, now show them the next video. So now it could be something where if maybe video one doesn't resonate, then try video two.
Mm-hmm. Do you offer in-app bidding?
Yes, there's in-app bidding. There's one other thing I should mention too, I forgot to mention, other way in Pixels track everything obviously for websites, and there's offline conversion. There's also tons of integrations with app analytics companies, so you can track things that happen in-app as well. So you can track in-app events, where it's or app installs, whatever that may be. You can also bid for in-app bids, so that if you have like let's say somebody's playing a game or whatever, and you wanted to bid for that type of content, yeah, you can absolutely do mobile in-app bids.
Okay. This is a little bit of a longer question. One of our attendees is the marketing director for an established appliance and electronics retailer that also happens to own their own television broadcasting company. So they're wondering if there have been any attempts to do programmatic advertising integrations with broadcast TV networks.
There have sort of when probably maybe 2-3 years ago, before the real rise of streaming. I know there were some attempts. Some companies had really sort of worked on like the programmatic bids through linear. Can't remember the exact name right now, but like linear TV, it's a little bit trickier. But when you're talking about something where you have a set-top device like OTT and it's streaming, definitely that's sort of where I think the industry has gone. Happy to have a conversation afterwards, though, with that person if they'd like to chat.
Great. We also have a question. Are there any specific considerations about competitor conquesting with programmatic?
It's I know that if you're talking about like I think I know what they're getting at here. If you're like on search or Google, if you're bidding for somebody's name or something like that, you can't bid for trademarks, et cetera, or whatever. But it doesn't mean you can't target that, right? So like a lot of times, like just people may target their competitors in search. Typically pay a huge premium, and sometimes it's not really all that effective just because of how search is structured. But there's not really those types of considerations on programmatic side. It's just an auction, so it just kind of depends on like how much you want to pay, and also I would say how much data you can get from that. Typically be location based. You can't target necessarily competitors from the standpoint of like, I want to target people who only go to this one website. But there may be data where like a very large brand or retailer has made it available to say like, hey, these are people who shop at X shoe store brand or X appliance store or whatever that would be, and you bid on that, but you'd be bidding against just about everybody else. So keep in mind it's an open auction, and it just depends on what you would want to pay, and again, who do you want to reach, what do you want to tell them, what do you want them to do.
Great. I'm going to sneak in just one more. For connected TV, can I pick the shows that I want my ad to display on?
I should have brought that up earlier. That's a great question. We get asked that a lot. With our platform, it's not something that you can do. It's really more along the lines of you're targeting multiple different. So let's say you wanted to target like a package on like Dish Network or like DirecTV Now or something like that, where it's like somebody's watching like Scripps program, right? So like HGTV or House Hunters or whatever, that sort of like like lifestyle content. That would be something where it's sort of like run of channel, where it would be like you can't necessarily say 100% that like it's that particular somebody's watching Food Network or etc. But you're really going after the data and saying like this household has propensity to going after the audience. We don't really care where we find them typically, but it's really after the audience, and we get that a lot for like live sports too. If you wanted to target somebody during like a specific baseball games, football games, etc. It can be really hard to target that exact game, but you can target, say, like like, hey, I want these ads to run during this time in this area where people are most likely to be watching these contents. And there are some ways to target specific like college sports packages that'll be coming up for March Madness, I'm sure.
Terrific. Well, thank you again, Brian. There's been so much great information today. If we ran out of time for your question, feel free to reach out to Adtaxi directly. You can see the information right here. And everyone, I really hope you enjoyed today's webinar sponsored by Adtaxi. Thanks again to all of you for joining us. We hope to see you again very soon. Have a great day.